Hi, everybody. Welcome to series three of our Future Tech podcast series. It's me, Charlie Sell, the Group MD of Arrows Group, where I have been interviewing leaders, heads of talent, chief people officers within our wider tech businesses, asking them for their thoughts, contributions, and basically career advice for our STEM listeners and the wider tech community. And it's a great pleasure. I've got Jason Waterman with me today. Jason is the head of talent at 11FS. 11FS are an award-winning products and services fintech business. Anyone who's on LinkedIn would have seen that they're in the fastest growing startup businesses and really going places. So really glad to have you on the show. Hi, Jason. How you doing?
Hey, Joe, I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, really good. Thanks, mate. Really good. And we were just having a chat beforehand, weren't we? Just about how coming out of COVID now and starting to look forward to next year and thinking about growth plans again. So I suppose the first starting point, as all of our listeners like to know, is just a bit about your story. How did you even get into fintech and people talent?
Yeah, it's a good question. And to be honest, I've been in what we now call talent, but back in the day was recruitment for 12 years. And I did the traditional route of totally stumbling into recruitment. I didn't grow up wishing to be a recruiter, to be honest, as I think is probably the case with most. So I started as a technology recruitment consultant, as I say, kind of 12, 13 years ago, and really went through that entire agency thing for a while. So I worked for agencies down south and up in London, but then the last kind of 4 or 5 years, I've been focused on internal talent acquisition. So I've been at 11FS just over a year now. So at 11FS, I head up the talent and recruiting function with a little bit of overlap into the people team as well. So I joined when we were about 80 people, and we scaled up really quickly in the UK and US. And obviously COVID has been a tricky time, but we're looking to kind of head back towards growth next year, which is awesome. And then before that, I had a couple of different roles at the digital ventures arm of Boston Consulting Group. So that part of that business within BCG essentially builds startups. So whilst I was there, I was lucky enough to kind of build the founding teams for 19 different businesses. And that ranged from diamond blockchain startups all the way through to petrol delivery platforms in Dubai and everything in between. So it's really interesting. And that was recruiting CEOs all the way through to truck drivers. So that was really broad, and that role kind of led me into 11FS, where I now head up that entire team, which has been great fun.
Yeah, wow. Well, that is, I mean, what better training ground to be able to work for businesses where you get to see a total breadth of different companies. And so what's kept you within the technology and the fintech space specifically then?
I think the really exciting thing about fintech specifically is that it's changing a system that the vast majority of people work with or use on a daily basis. So most people in the UK have got at least one bank account, and it's typically with a big incumbent, and there's so much frustration I think that people have. So the really exciting thing about working on 11FS is that you get to see how not only those incumbents, how they want to change, but then you get to see the new exciting ways of building these new platforms and this new technology, but then also how people interact with it. So someone that's 18 will use a bank account in a massively different way to someone that's 60. And it's really interesting to see both from a research point of view, how our teams go about kind of finding out what it is that their banks customers want to do and how they want to use the products, and then to kind of our product development teams actually building banks from scratch. So we're building banks from literally a starting point, blank piece of paper, to then a card and a bank that works in the market. So being able to see things like that, to recruit and build teams that can actually build banks or build totally new businesses is really exciting. And for me, that's why I enjoy it, because it's not just BAU doing the same thing over and over again. It's creating something from scratch with new teams in new countries. So it's exciting, I think, and it's totally different each time as well. So it's the cliche of no 2 days are the same is quite true in a business that's a really fast growing tech, fintech business as well.
Yeah. Well, and as I say, getting that breadth of experience, not only from your previous company where it's different companies, but working for a consultancy, like you say, you seeing every different type of business from startup to probably more established companies. And does that have an impact about listeners and people who are joining the market or wanting to get into technology? Have you seen the profile or the type of people getting into technology from an engineering perspective? Is there something that's changed over years or a common theme that you look for now?
Yeah, I mean, I know specifically from kind of personal cases in terms of recruiting people that we look a lot further than just people's kind of CVs now. So I think in the past it was, that the focus was on how technically good is someone, and there was much less concern or focus for some of the softer skills. So if I take the example of consulting in particular, there is a requirement or an element that you are good at the communication side of things. So again, if we're going to take consultancy, so BCG is a great example that there is a level of expectation on engineers to be able to stand up and explain to non-engineering folk why they've done a thing. So it's easy enough to say we built this product and it works, but explaining how it works is not easy, especially to someone like myself who has no idea how engineers build a thing. So being able to talk in layman terms is really, really important. So a huge chunk of what we do at 11FS now with interviews is test people on how they communicate with not just their teammates and the people that have seen all of the workings, but then a total newcomer, a total newbie to an industry or a product. So I think that's where it's changed in the last 5 years, perhaps, is that there's a focus on how people communicate, their attitude, their willingness to do things maybe slightly outside of their normal day-to-day job description. So that whole kind of values and culture bit, are you willing to pitch in and help do a deck and present to someone, or can you run a workshop and something that's a little bit different? So I think it's just the testing of things that are slightly away from your core BAU day-to-day stuff.
Yeah, well, and that's really good advice, because that's something that we speak a lot about within the universities when preparing students for getting their first jobs, is thinking of things like Toastmasters or that public, having confidence or pushing yourself a little bit out there in terms of presentation skills. And there's many forums that they can do it, isn't there? From simple personal podcasts all the way through to actually trying to join sort of societies where you have to practice being able to communicate to different audiences.
Yeah, and I mean it's a terrifying thing to have to practice as well, and it's not enjoyable even just doing it in front of a really small room of people that I think that's sometimes actually harder. So I think some of the advice that I've received in the past is just putting it on your own. So I quite often, it's a little bit easier now that we're all on Zooms, but I think it's recording yourself, whether that be just on your iPhone or whether you're recording yourself on a Zoom, just really to practice, because there's really key things that people you take for granted in terms of like how you breathe when you're presenting. I think it's really easy to talk a million miles an hour, forget to breathe, get a really, really dry throat, and then you kind of get into a bit of a panic. So at least if you're watching yourself back, however uncomfortable that might be, at least then you can pick up your body language, certain expressions. Do I need to stop talking? It's just little things like that people don't necessarily pick up when you're just in free flow talking. It's that kind of going back and analysing certain tics or certain ways of talking, or as I say, just kind of taking that breath sometimes makes a massive difference.
Yeah, and again, that's a great piece of advice. Just the simple breathing techniques can completely change how you come across. And something that was quite interesting when speaking with people at your level, and I know it's a really hot topic right now, so it's also trying to decide what's relevant, what isn't. When we think about things like diversity and inclusion, and when we think about unbiased interviewing and how people can either prepare or what they can do. What are you doing at 11FS specifically, with part of your people agenda around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing for us is that we want to create opportunities for people. So I think one of the kind of key cornerstones, the way that I see it personally from a D&I point of view, is that there's not enough opportunity for people that are restricted or where there's minority groups or underrepresented groups. A huge problem is the opportunity that people do or don't get. So what we want to try and do as much as possible at 11FS is reduce some of the really easy kind of barriers to entry. So whether that be years of experience or whether that be job descriptions that are kind of shopping lists, we try to make our job descriptions more descriptive rather than, you need to have this 10 bullet point list of things. There's tons and tons of research into who applies for a job and who doesn't apply for a job when they see, a list of 10 things. That just is an immediate barrier to entry for a lot of people. So we want to make our opportunities as broad as possible and actually reduce the barrier to people just applying for the jobs. I think a lot of the time there's a confidence level that comes with people that have a certain level of privilege that underrepresented groups don't necessarily have. So I think if we can just make the application process as easy as possible, so that then at least people are getting the opportunity to have a chat to someone like me, and then even if you're not right for the role, at least there's that initial confidence boost, and then you can get some advice and some tips just from those initial conversations. So I think that creation of opportunity is one of the really easy things that almost any company can do. I think it's removing, the shopping list, as I say, that is what stops people applying for a job. So I think almost any company can make their job descriptions more of a story than a list, and that's quite simple, I think.
Yeah, and again, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the most obvious one that, like you said, there's so much research about it, but even just between female and male applicants, isn't it? That the stereotypical male will look at a 70% fit and go, yeah, I can do that job and apply, whereas a stereotype of even female applicants will be, well, it has to be 90%, otherwise I might be wasting their time, whereas you can reduce that gap as long as many others. You're right, it's all about opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's stats like that people take for granted, I think. So it's just making sure that job descriptions are as neutral as possible, and then obviously the processes that people go through. So our interviews, we try to make as, obviously people have to inject their personalities to them, but we try to make them as consistent as possible, so that, relatively similar questions, the same sort of metrics, and then the same opportunities for people to ask questions as well. And that then hopefully enables people to show how good they are and look past things like what uni someone went to, or, how many jobs they've had over a 5-year period. It's those sorts of things that we can strip away and really delve into people's personalities and their actual skill sets as well.
Yeah, great. So then thinking around our STEM listeners and people who are now getting ready, this time next year probably for their first jobs, have you got any career advice when thinking about, if they came to you to say, what should I do to prepare? What advice would you give to graduates about to enter the job market?
Yeah, I mean, I think a huge one, especially if we're thinking about the kind of startup or hyper growth world, is to be as kind of flexible as possible in your approach. So again, if I take my own personal example, I've worked with these startups, as I mentioned, and my job is talent, but actually I've done lots of other things within that as well. So everything from office management, so going collecting trays of Pret and setting up meetings and answering front desk kind of reception calls, all the way through to interviewing a CEO. So I think the big thing is to take opportunities not just as what the job title is and necessarily what the job description says. I think it's going into it as open-mindedly as possible and saying anything that you do pick up as enjoyable or as momentarily unenjoyable as it is a learning experience, especially in that first chunk of your career where you are a bit more of a sponge and you will be asked to do things that are a much broader spectrum in comparison to just a job description. So I think that that kind of attitude to learning is really, really important. So kind of showing willing to muck in and do things that are a little bit different. And I think it's okay to not know what you want to do. And that, I think that sounds a little bit silly, but lots of people grow up, and as I said at the top, I didn't grow up thinking I wanted to be a recruiter. So I think it happens all the time where people start a job and then they within that job start to specialize on one particular thing, and it can take you off in a totally different path to what you perhaps started out with, or the idea you started with. So I think it's just that acceptance that nobody has their life planned out when they're in their early 20s, and kind of that's okay, and you shouldn't stress about that, and be open to different opportunities and what that may well present as well.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more there. The being flexible and continual learning, and you're right. And it's probably not even just with startups, is it? I think in any business now, if they're a forward-thinking, innovative company, which is what should inspire most people to join, you almost want that flexibility to learn different things. It's because I suppose one of my last questions, and it sort of relates to a number of the CTOs I've been speaking about, the changing landscape of software engineering, whereas, when you and I were recruiting, let's say, and a developer needed a very specific skill set, but now with full stack engineers and polyglot engineering, where we're looking at a breadth of skills. Is that something that's quite important for you guys as well, to see that people can learn new technologies as much as have that flexible approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the time in FS we use a tech stack that isn't the most popular in the market, so we don't have huge pools of people to speak to. So we do take the approach of let's speak to people that have an interest in learning new technology, and I think that ties into that attitude piece that you mentioned, and the willingness to learn. We don't necessarily have to be looking for the finished article. It's the want and need, that curiosity to learn something new is really, really important. And I think people can demonstrate that in lots of different ways, but when people are applying for jobs, I think the big thing we say to them is to have some sort of digital cover letter almost. So I think the kind of cover letter is a page of A4 talking about achievements is still super valuable, but we're really seeing the rise in portfolios or demonstration of work that you're doing. And I know that's not easy for someone that is in final year at uni or looking for their first job, but even if you can just demonstrate, I've done this on the side, I've done some volunteering, I do this in my own personal time, things like that will definitely give you kind of an advantage in ways to say that, like, look, I had no idea what I was doing 6 months ago, but I've taught myself this, or I've, sat on a million YouTube hours learning how to do JavaScript, and this is what I've put together. So I think just having examples, even if it's, a GitHub page or your own website or some PDF examples, just of things that you've tried to learn, those little things would definitely help, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that as well, because I think there's some really good tips there, and like you say, just being able to show that you're being able to learn things like GitHub and Stack Overflow, and even, again, like we said earlier, even your personal blogs can all add to your willingness to learn. So, well, that's been brilliant. So look, thank you, Jason. That's been some really good tips there, and like I say, great to know not just your story, but what 11FS are doing as well, and for a lot of the listeners out there, as I say, well, you guys, I think we mentioned earlier, you're what, 3 years in a row you've won Consultancy of the Year within, is it the Banking Awards?
Yeah, so we're 2 years on the trot, British Bank Awards Consultancy of the Year, and then 3 years on the trot, top LinkedIn startups in the UK. So it's been nice to collect some awards, most definitely.
Yeah, and be part of that journey. So for everyone, that's another episode of our Future Tech podcast series. As I said, it's series 3 now, and it will be posted on both our Spotify channel, but also on the career portals of all of our partner universities. So one more time, and thank you to Jason.
Thanks very much.
And until the next one, thank you.